Welcome to Let's Talk Adoption, and we're so glad you're joining us today for a conversation we really believe every hopeful adoptive family should hear.
Yes, especially if families are just starting to explore newborn domestic adoption. That is adoption of a newborn baby or a very young child within the U.S. Today's episode, we're really focusing on the 3 things we wish every family knew before they start the adoption process.
And Heather, you and I have had years of experience working with families, observing people come and go, families coming and going through the process, watching what goes well, what takes people by surprise, and what causes families to experience frustration or heartache that was totally avoidable.
And I think that if we could have this conversation before all that, I think families would come into adoption with a little better understanding. I know that adoption can feel overwhelming, especially if you've been through fertility treatments, if you've been through pregnancy loss, if you've been through other disappointments. Adoption, there's so many moving parts. There's the legal steps. There's the emotions getting to adoption. There's relationships. There's your own relationship if you're married. It's so easy, I think, for families to focus just on the outcome, getting to hold their baby, getting a baby to call our own. But today, I'm glad we're really kind of like zooming out a little bit, looking a little more globally at adoption and talking about the foundation, what really can help families understand before they start the process that will make it easier, smoother, and hopefully avoid some of that frustration and heartache.
And the first thing we want to talk about is adoption is not a transaction. The word transaction, some adoptive parents hope that it will be a transaction. ABC, steps 1, 2, 3, I invest in this process and I get my desired result. They are expecting and hoping that it will be very transactional. And yet other families say, we don't want this to feel like a transaction.
Right.
This is God meeting our needs. This is us growing our family. And the last thing we want is for anyone involved to feel like this is a transaction in any way, shape, or form.
Right. And I think it's easy to think, especially when you start looking into adoption, talking to adoption professionals, it's easy to think, okay, I fill out an application, I get approved, I pay some fees, a nice lady comes to our house and does some interviews, then I get matched, I bring home a baby, and it's done. It sounds like a process. Step 1, 2, 3. It sounds very clear and laid out, but adoption is not a product you buy. I'm going to say that again. Adoption is not a product you buy. What it is, it's a relationship that you as adoptive parents are invited into.
Exactly. I think this is the perspective that can sometimes take adoptive parents by surprise, especially after all that they've been through and how ready they are to be mom and dad and how ready their life is that they have intentionally built. But we want to be really clear. Yes, there are fees in adoption. There are steps. You have to build the vessel for the blessing to flow into, right? So you've got to construct that in some way, shape, or form. But you're not paying for a baby. You're paying for services. The nice woman that comes to the home and does a couple interviews with you. Well, that's your home study. There are background checks. There's legal work to make this adoption, ethical and according to state laws that pertain in your adoption, and to make sure that your adoption is safe and secure as
Mhm.
you fully become parents with all legal rights to this child, and counseling and support for the expectant mother, and the agency's work in making connections and guiding the process. And, agencies work with many women who just stop by on their path to somewhere else and just need some support, some
Mhm.
information, and decide to parent. It's the exceptional woman that ends up choosing adoption. She is the exception to the norm. And those agencies are providing an immense amount of services behind the scenes that it may not seem that it's directly impacting your ability to adopt, but it is. It
Mhm.
is. The agency has to be there for all the women who are open to having the adoption conversation to find the one that is going to have and create that adoption plan with you.
And I think, Kim, when we're looking at choices like fertility treatments, we look at those as medical expenses and we go into that with the idea about medical expenses. There's a fee, there's a professional, and if it doesn't work, then that was part of it going forward. I think too often families don't go into adoption with that same mindset. They see adoption as a purchase. I'm going to pay this money and I'm going to get the thing. And then they start making decisions more like a consumer rather than like a patient or a client in other arenas. And I think when we do that, we run the risk of maybe feeling entitled, maybe feeling resentful if things don't go your way or the way you expected them to. And I think really you need to approach adoption more as, coming into it with the idea that you are engaging services as part of establishing a sacred trust, uh, a calling to step into a child's life as parents with humility. I think when you can come into that, and we've seen many adoptive parents grow into this understanding, they really are able to make space for something that is, I think, much more satisfying, fulfilling, um, an adoption journey that's more peaceful and ultimately um, more beautiful because it is not focused on a consumer's buying journey. It's focused on, this relationship and this outcome that is definitely not transactional.
Right. And I love that you said, shift to seeing adoption as a calling,
Hmm.
a path that God has you on.
Hmm.
And even though what happened may have been infertility, it may have
Hmm.
been loss, there may have been something external, not entirely spiritual, driving you to open your heart to adoption or to start to take those steps and engage with an agency, get a home study, make a profile, and do all the things you have to do in order to adopt.
Right.
But if you can see it more as the calling, and that's what I love about the book that you're a part of, Heather,
Hmm.
Called to Adoption, that you wrote with Mardie Caldwell. It's been, I think, so validating for families to read that because maybe they felt they were a little weird feeling called to
Right.
adoption
Right.
in spite of the fact that they're also experiencing infertility and adoption may be the way that they can become parents, but that it's also a calling.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's not always easy to understand, right?
Hmm.
But I think if you can pray that the Lord will help you understand the call that's been placed on you, I think that will help you get further away from the expectations that you would have as a consumer and align more with your role now as parents who are walking a path you've been called to.
Hmm. Hmm.
And let's talk about the expectant mom for a moment because she's at the heart of all of this.
Absolutely.
She's not a service provider or a gatekeeper. She's a woman making one of the hardest decisions of her life, relinquishing a child. And in private domestic adoption, she's choosing to relinquish a child voluntarily. And Heather, you and I know, and I'm sure most families can understand, it's not out of a lack of love that she's doing this or neglect or anything like that. She is fully providing a future for this child that she is unable to provide by planning an adoption and inviting you to be the parents. So if you're chosen, it's not because you were the best offer. Usually it's because something in your story resonated with her, and that's not something you can manufacture, right?
No.
There's no checklist that can, put you in that position to where now you're going to sync up with the right birth mom. It's going to be really in her heart and mind and her life experience that when she sees something in your profile, it just clicks with her. And it might not be something she ever even tells you about. We have a lot of adoptions where the families get picked and we talk later and say, did she ever tell you why she chose you? And you say, no, and they say, no, we never went into that,
Right.
Sometimes they do talk about it. And I think that's a fun part of an adoption experience and story that families get to have. But something resonated with her. There was a connection.
And really that should create gratitude, not pressure. It should create the feeling, I think, of really being honored and certainly excited and hopeful because she did choose you. She could have chosen other families. She chose you. And it's not that she chose you to give her baby to. She chose you to entrust with her child for the child's lifetime. There's something about you that she felt she could trust. And that's not a small thing. I mean, I think in this life, Kim, there's not much more one of us can do for another selflessly, like an expectant mom does as she's voluntarily relinquishing that child to adoptive parents. This is not a small thing she is doing. And I really think that, one of the things we're going to talk a little bit about as we go through today's show is more about the expectant mother. But for adoptive parents, that time when you are chosen, if you have this mindset shift and can see it as really something to be thankful for, not something that you're entitled to, it really helps move the needle on the gravity, I think, of the understanding of adoption.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of healing and connection that can happen when adoptive families begin their journey by saying, it's not about what we want, even though it is, you're here because you want a baby.
Right.
But really the way you're approaching it is, one, trusting God is going to meet your need. Trusting you're going to follow the black and white ABC 1, 2, 3 steps, and that you will be in the best position, having built the vessel for the blessing to flow into. Trusting all that's in place and getting out of the way. Set yourself aside. And now you focus on the fact that it's about what this child and this woman need. And if we're chosen to be part of their story, we'll honor that responsibility.
Absolutely. So that's really, I think, our first and biggest encouragement for hopeful adoptive families is to come into adoption with the mindset that you're stepping into a relationship, not completing a transaction. Keeping, both your head and your heart in that posture will really shape everything else as you walk through adoption.
There's a book I really want to recommend. It's called So I Was Thinking About Adoption, and it's a gentle, honest guide for women who are facing an unexpected pregnancy and just need space to consider adoption without pressure. So I Was Thinking About Adoption is a great tool for anyone walking alongside women, pregnancy centers, church ministries, even friends and family who want to offer support with compassion and truth. You can find So I Was Thinking About Adoption on Amazon or download a free copy at freeadoptionbook.com. It's a resource worth having on hand. So let's move into the second thing that we wish every family knew. That and life is so much easier when we all understand this, no matter
Mm-hmm.
if it's adoption or something else. But
Mm-hmm.
your expectations and reality will probably not match, and that's okay.
You know, that's great. And you're right, Kim. This is something that really affects not just adoption, but every part of our lives. If you sit with right now as a newly hopeful adoptive parent, what your expectations are, you know, it's probably best to think, you may not know enough to have actual expectations. Those expectations may have been shaped by something you saw on TV or a story you read. Because we talk to a lot of couples who think they'll get chosen quickly, or maybe who don't think they'll get chosen quickly. Maybe they expect adoption to be smooth and a straight line, and, don't realize that the home study is as big a task as it is. Their expectations aren't necessarily in line with um, reality because their knowledge isn't shaped yet. Adoption's something you definitely learn a lot on the way. And I think it's good to know that adoption also has a way of probably, I would say, surprising you. I mentioned the home study. That can be a surprise for families that you have to, gather as many documents and do as much as you have to do. And there may be times that adoption stretches your patience also.
Mhm. And you might have expectations, as far as how things are going to work
Hmm.
when you finally get your opportunity to adopt. And you might imagine a quiet hospital handoff and maybe they have a room for you where you get to bond with your baby privately, you and your spouse and your new baby. And suddenly you find yourself in a whirlwind last minute situation. You're rushing, you're scheduling a last minute flight, you're renting a car in the middle of the night somewhere you never expected to be when you woke up that morning. You go
Right.
to the hospital, they're booked solid, they don't have a room for you. You're cramming into just some small corner holding your new baby, and you're thinking, this is not what I thought this was going to be like.
Hmm.
But I want to tell you, let go of how. Let
Right.
go of how and embrace what is
Hmm.
and have no expectation of how this happens. Just keep your eye on the end result, which is you get to have your baby. You know, you might even wait much longer than you thought you would. You might even wonder if anything's happening at all when a ton of things are happening behind the scenes, just nothing quite concrete enough to let you know about yet. But if we can let go of how, I think that solves a lot of problems as far as expectations.
Hmm. And I think too, um, sometimes people assume that if they're ready with certain things, it will go faster. If we have the nursery set up, you know, we can show a picture of that, it'll go faster. Oh, great. It might. You know, if we have our home study done quicker, it'll go faster. Well, yeah, you will be shown to birth mothers, expecting mothers sooner. So, yeah, it might go faster. Where families can really affect things is really, like their preferences for a child. If your preferences are more open, you are going to have more opportunities to be shown. If your preferences are more narrow, you're going to have fewer opportunities, which means fewer opportunities to be chosen. So again, it's learning in this process, because what you might think you know until you are in the process and working and talking and learning, that's really when I think some of our assumptions are challenged, so that we can get our expectations in line with what reality is.
Hmm. Yeah. And the expectation that you're going to check all the boxes in the checklist, and then, like a vending machine, the desired
Mhm.
result will pop out. And you're not wrong for thinking that, right?
Mhm.
Because a
Mhm.
lot of other things in life are like that. As you grow up and you go through, you have a goal for yourself, you follow the process, you check all the boxes, you do what you need to do. You're a good girl, you're the good guy, you get what you expect to receive,
Right.
right? But in adoption, it's the most unique experience you're ever going to have in your life. And it's really just, it's not a checklist. Yes, you have to do the checklist. I keep going
Right.
back to that, right? Like it's not going to happen if you don't do the checklist.
Right.
But the checklist isn't going to cause the adoption, right? There's no amount of being good enough and on top of it enough and planning and organizing enough for this, for you to make this happen.
Mhm.
It's a human decision. Expectant moms are making deeply personal choices. And sometimes you don't get picked for reasons that have nothing to do with you. And that's what I try to help families understand when I'm working with couples is their expectation. Hey, if you don't adopt within a year or 18 months, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of time that that birth mom is on her own unique course and her own journey to even considering adoption and finding you and feeling that connection with you. And that is something you can't control.
And Kim, I know we've both been asked by families, can you find out why an expectant mom didn't choose us? And I can tell them with absolute certainty why. And that why is typically because she felt a connection with someone else. There really isn't a why, or I should say, there rarely is a why when it comes to why not. But there always is some type of reason for the one that she did pick. And it could be that there's something in the picture that she felt a connection with, just something in their photograph. It could be shared interests, shared hobbies, things about them that she hoped to provide for a child that they are providing, that their life is about, that is in her mind's eye of what she wants her child to have. It could be where they live. It could be so many different things. But rarely is it because they looked like Barbie and Ken, or because they had the biggest house, or because they were you know the prettiest couple. Those aren't the reasons. It's more about those connections. She sees something that feels comfortable or comforting as she's making this huge decision.
Mhm. So be prepared, but also stay flexible. God's timing and the connection that leads to placement is rarely what you expect. And when you hear other adoption stories, and this is why it's so important to come to webinars and listen to podcasts like this and take advantage of the education that your agency provides, so that you do get access to real life, actual adoption experiences. Never think that couldn't happen to us.
Mhm.
Or, I hope ours is different. Just remain open and surrender to what God is bringing into your life.
Right. And try, and this is hard for type A personalities, but try to hold on to the process loosely. I think there's an old 38 Special song, Hold On Loosely, made me think of that. Try not to worry about taking control. You have control of what you control. You have control of completing the checklist we talked about, the home study, all those things, getting great photos. You have that part of the control, but don't try to grasp control. Don't try to compare your journey to others. Um, Understand that, you own 50% of this, and the expectant mother, she owns the other 50%. If you can kind of stay in that place, you will find more peace, especially during the wait. And especially if your agency provides ongoing support and that coordinator that you can check in with, especially if it's just you need to check in on a rough day. But that's just something really to keep in mind, is the part of adoption that adoptive families can control is their side of it, not the expectant mom's side.
Mhm. And a lot of the growth that adoptive parents experience happens during the wait. And there's so much truth in that because the wait might be the first time in a long time that you don't have a checklist you're responsible for,
Right.
that you're not checking the calendar for week to week and what you need to be doing, such as in the infertility part of the story that
Hmm.
possibly brought you to adoption. This could be the first quiet moment that you even have, and it feels so foreign. Be aware of that. Listening to a podcast like this, we're helping you become aware of this, and now it's your responsibility to decide, when I look back at this chapter in my life, if this was an actual book I was reading, how do I want my character to be described? Who do I want to have been in this story? Even if I'm the only one who knew what my mind was thinking, or maybe only my husband knew and my adoption professional knew how hard I was trying to control the process and how difficult the wait was and how much it was getting to me and how I was just couldn't understand why this isn't happening versus surrendering and working on perhaps other areas of my life and navigating this chapter, which we don't know how many pages are in this chapter, right? That's the hard thing about it.
Hmm.
Navigating it with grace, right? So
Right.
thinking about what you want your role to have been, what you want to have, your character. What did you want that to look like when you look back? And perhaps it's something that only you will know of, but you will have such peace in your heart. And especially hearing this information maybe before you get into the thick of things. Or maybe
Right.
this is a moment when you're like, okay, I'm going to have some awareness and redirect my behavior a little bit. This is where your faith can get tested, your heart can be softened, and your vision expands.
So if you're in the middle of that gap between being ready and matched, I'd say hang in there. Your story's still unfolding. If you haven't yet gotten to the ready part, I hope this helps you really enter into the next stage with expectations maybe a little more aligned or just a little looser, so that you can, realize that every adoption looks different, not just at the hospital, but the weight looks different. And, you really can find and understand that the time you're waiting, as Kim said, there's a lot of growth that happens during that time, especially as you are preparing to meet the expectant mother who will ultimately choose you.
And that brings us right into Act 3, the final section of this podcast. The birth mother matters before, during, and after. And this is something we wish every family knew. She matters throughout the entire process and as you continue on in parenting your child. She will always matter.
And she isn't a footnote. She isn't a hurdle to the process. She isn't a vessel growing the child. She isn't a something to be obtained or
She's not a
cast off.
commodity.
No.
Right? She's not a commodity or a surrogate.
No,
People confuse that
she's
as
not
well.
a surrogate. She is a woman walking through an incredibly hard decision. I think the hardest decision that we as women can make. And how you treat her and how the people you have engaged to help her, such as, your attorney, or any agency you've chosen to work with, how they treat her matters.
And feelings about the birth mom can be complicated, right?
Sure.
There can be intimidation. There can be a little fear or apprehension that these feelings can come from a variety of stereotypes or just your own vulnerability in your role as prospective adoptive parents hoping to get picked by the birth mother. And people often think, well, they always think at some point, what if she changes her mind? Or what if she wants to be too involved, she wants more contact than what we are comfortable with. We're very private people. We're more introverted. What if she's expecting something of us that we just aren't able to meet? And what if it feels really uncomfortable?
Right. Well, let's back up just a minute. I love the first question you said, what if she changes her mind? I just want families to understand adoption is not a decision she makes one time. She doesn't, at 23 weeks in her pregnancy, she's talked to the adoption agency, she's talked to a counselor, she's decided, I'm going to do adoption, and the decision is made. That is not what's going on in her head. She is having to make that decision time after time after time. When she goes to the doctor and she tells the doctor, I have an adoption plan, they say, oh, are you sure? Have you thought about all your options? When she tells her best friend, her friend will say, oh gosh, really? Are you sure about this? Her mom, maybe another child, if she has a child who she's told. When she goes to the hospital and the social worker at the hospital meets with her, she's, are you sure this is something you want to do? When she meets with the attorney or the attorney's representative to sign the papers, she is presented with all her options again and asked if she's sure. But even beside that, set all those opportunities aside. She is asking herself that over and over and over. Am I sure? Am I sure about this? I still have time to change my mind. So one of the things that I really encourage adoptive families to do is don't ask her. Don't ask her if she's sure. She has that running in her head already all of the time. What she needs from you is acceptance and care and concern and honor. And to show her it's not just about the baby, that you care about her as a person, that you understand this is a big decision she's making, and that you are appreciative and grateful that she has chosen you even just to consider as adoptive parents for her child. And then, the question, Kim, you asked about what if she wants to be too involved? That's why, for us, it's a big thing to have that conversation before the adoption, and we try to have it with her. We encourage adoptive parents to have it so that, back to that expectation topic, expectations are in line. What she wants has been communicated, and the adoptive parents are accepting of that. But, I think it's good to remember, when we start from a place of fear, we lose empathy. So if we're fearful about her changing her mind, if we're fearful about her wanting too much contact, it's hard to truly show and express that empathy for her. And that's because we are then wrapped up in how it looks for us. That's what fear does. And we really need to stay in a place where we can see the expectant mom, we can see her, we can support her, and we can ensure that not only are we treating her with dignity, but the people we've engaged to help her are as well.
And one of my favorite verses is 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind.
Awesome.
So the power that you've been called to this, the knowing you've checked all the boxes, the knowing you've chosen a great adoption professional as your partner, love, that you are walking through every step in love, and of a sound mind, wisdom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fear is not of the Lord.
Right.
That's from someone else
Mm-hmm.
who shall go unnamed at the moment. If it's fear, it's never from God. The Bible says it. It's not from God. So embrace that, right?
Right.
Embrace that. And I think when you are not coming from fear, you're not coming from a place where you're feeling threatened.
Mm-hmm.
You know that God has called you here, like I said before, and he is going to work his plan, and your job is to let him.
Right.
So,
Right. So, I think as we kind of talk a little more about fear, that is one of the big fears families have when they're coming into domestic newborn adoption, is that open adoption. What does that look like? Will she want to, will the expectant mom want to co-parent? Will she want to be involved? What does that look like? And certainly, we help educate that, educate families about that, what it does look like, what to expect, what it will feel like. And I think it's good to know that it, like we've talked about everything, it varies. And and if she does stay in touch, that's fabulous. But even if she doesn't, how all these things we're talking about with the expectant mom, including how you think about her, how you speak about her, what you tell your child about her, though that will shape your child's identity. And one of the most powerful things you can give your future child is the sense that their birth mother is loved and honored by you, that she wasn't erased, that you're not threatened by her presence in their story. You're not fearful of her. And whether she is involved or is not involved, that she is a welcome part of your family.
and we've seen amazing open adoptions where there's genuine friendship between the adoptive parents and birth families.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, we've also seen the other end of the spectrum where there may be little to no contact. And often the adoptive parents who have invested in their education and value open adoption, they're disappointed by that. They're saddened that they don't get to have that for their child's sake. But the key is that the adoptive parents remain respectful and grateful either way. And one tip that I have and this is maybe a little off topic, but a practical tip is if you adopt with a birth mom who wants little to no contact, or she's in touch and then she drifts off, and this can ebb and flow through the years, that still put the updates together. Maybe you print out some photos and write a card and put it in a box that you keep throughout the years so that when she does resurface, you can present her with this and say, "You were always in our hearts. Here's what we wanted you to know through those times when you just couldn't be here with us." And then present her with that. And if you never hear from her, then your child can always know. My parents always honored my birth mom, even though for her own personal reasons, and there can be serious reasons,
Mm-hmm.
she just wasn't able to have the connection that we all desired.
Mm-hmm. And another tip is for families still waiting, I would encourage you to start praying for your child's birth mother, even before you know who she is. And certainly, you know, you can't underestimate the power of prayer, but what praying does for us is it often softens our hearts. It will help prepare you to love her as she's moving through incredibly weighty decisions. And I promise it will change how you see and feel about her when you do finally get that call that says, you know what, a birth mother has chosen you. There's a part of you that will feel like, "Ah, I've been praying for her." And now you're going to be able to know who you've been praying for. And you will be, I believe God will have you better prepared for the next step of your adoption.
Mm-hmm. So stay prayed up even before you're in that active situation. Stay prayed up.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, when your path finally intersects with that birth mom, she doesn't owe you anything. Not a placement, not a perfect relationship. But if you do get to walk through that experience together, treat it as sacred.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Kim. So I think this has been a great conversation. And, you know, I think what this all comes down to is just understanding the three things that basically Kim and I, after talking to thousands of adoptive parents,
Mm-hmm.
really would want them to know coming into their adoption journeys. First, adoption is not a transaction, it's an invitation into a relationship and a very sacred story, your child's story. Secondly, your expectations, they may not match your reality, but it doesn't mean it'll be wrong or bad. It means it will be different and unique, and it will be your story, your child's story, and your child's birth mother's story also.
Mm-hmm.
And then thirdly is that the birth mother matters deeply. And your respect for her, I promise you, it will shape your entire adoption experience and your child's sense of identity and sense of self-worth, knowing that his birth mother loved him so much that she placed him in your arms. That is something that the more respect and love you have for her, the more secure your child will be in who he is.
Mm-hmm. And after what Heather just said, it's obvious that adoption is beautiful, but also complex. And when you go into it with the right mindset and an open heart, you'll be more prepared to handle both the joy and the challenges.
And, if you're listening and you're thinking, wow, I've got some thinking to do here. That's good. That means, you're approaching adoption thoughtfully. And that's exactly the kind of parent that adoptive parents need to be.
Hmm. Thanks for being with us today. And if this episode helped you, please share it with someone else who's just starting to consider adoption.
And, if you're further along or have questions or want more resources, Kim, I didn't tell you this, but I'm going to give out your email address. You can reach Kim at kim@lifetimeadoption.com. She is awesome at answering questions or helping provide resources for families who are exploring adoption.
Hmm. And we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Adoption. Thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Adoption. If you'd like to learn more about today's episode, please visit letstalkadoption.com. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Until next time, take care and God bless.